So you may recall that a few months ago I did a run-through of the discography of the band Camel, and in the comments for one of the videos that I did on Camel, there was a suggestion from the author Hamish Kuzminski, I hope I'm doing that name somewhat justice, that I read his entry on Camel in the On Track series, every song, every album by an artist. So I did buy it and read it, and I enjoyed it. And since I've done the On Track book review for a different artist that I did a discography deep dive on, I thought it'd be appropriate to go through Kuzminski's work as well. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. Check us out on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service if you are a fan of thoughtful, emotional, complex, but accessible music in the art rock, prog rock tradition. Now, as far as Kuzminski's credentials, he's been a Camel fan for 45 years. He saw Camel live for the first time in 1977 and numerous times since then. And it's clear from reading the book that he is steeped not just in the albums, but in all the supplementary and biographical material available. And the introduction indicates actually that he was able to get input from both Andy Latimer and Colin Bass. I've been corrected on my pronunciation of that name. Andy Latimer and Colin Bass regarding the history of the band. So it sounds like he had some direct interviewing he was able to do in addition to a pretty great wealth of sources. And that points to the thing I enjoyed the most about the book, actually, which is, obviously it's, primarily a song-by-song analysis of their catalog, but for me as an author, it was maybe even significantly more interesting to read the biographical material, right? He's written a surprisingly detailed and compelling biography of Latimer and the band. Now, I'm not aware of any book-length biographies of Camel or of Andy Latimer being available up until now. Please correct me about that if I'm wrong. The sense I get from the book is that the main biographical resource fans would have had is the DVD Curriculum Vitae, which he cites a number of times, but he also weaves in quite a lot of other interviews, sources, the aforementioned, his own interviews with Latimer and Bass, things like interviews on podcasts. He's clearly been reviewing and accumulating this material for a long time. And, his introductions to the albums, his details about the songs, the coverage that he does of historical interludes, really give a pretty full portrait of, not just the music, but the context around it. Now, the biographical material may be of more or less interest to some of you, but for me personally, it really added a lot of understanding to why they have the catalog that they do, with sometimes rather abrupt and, after the first 5 albums or so, fairly continuous changes in personnel and style, and also long gaps of inactivity. And the lineup changes and the circumstances and the challenges, those do so much to influence the content of the albums that knowing the whys for those things in real depth with comment from the members, it added a lot of emotional weight to my knowledge of the band. That's especially true of the work that they did in the 1990s and 2000s. I talked in my reviews of Dust and Dreams and Harbor of Tears about how much I appreciate those albums for their ability, the kind of drive and passion and resourcefulness that it took to make something so ambitious with what is, clearly relatively limited resources. And reading more in depth about the foundation of Camel Productions and Latimer and Hoover's move from England to California really increased that appreciation and made me fairly fond of those albums. Now, as far as the descriptions of the songs, once again, Kuzminski's knowledge of the circumstances and the music and all the archival research that seems to have gone into the book, those things add lots of interesting detail. I can't remember if I talked much in my review of I Can See Your House From Here about Phil Collins's contribution to it, such as it is, but there are a couple moments there that I've often heard and I've just thought, damn, that sounds like Phil, some percussion flourishes, which remind me a lot of Los Indos, for instance. And the liner notes, if I remember right, only credit him on 2 songs, neither of which are the ones that to me actually sound like he's on them, Kuzminski digs up a quote from Jan Schellhaus where he talks about says that he remembers Phil, playing at some point on practically every song on the album, which I found refreshing and satisfying because, I had kind of gotten that sense from listening to it as well, and it's not really clear from the just very surface level historical record what happened there. Another example, kind of a random one, but in the album Stationary Traveler, Kuzminski mentions that Ton Scherpenzeel plays a heavily processed accordion that sounds like a synthesizer on the song Refugee, and then later on the song Long Goodbyes uses a harmonium preset on a Prophet 5 synthesizer, which sounds uncannily realistic, remarkably like an accordion. And it's just kind of a fascinating little irony that they have, an accordion made to sound like a synth at the beginning and a synth made to sound like an accordion at the end. And I just, I love little details like that, and I probably never would have picked up on that without this book. I don't know if it significantly changed my opinion of any particular album or song, or made me hear anything in a radically different light. Mostly that's because I did know these albums pretty well going into it. I've lived with them for a few years, somewhere between a few and quite a few years now, and know them, fairly well, and I have pretty set opinions on them. But it is always interesting to hear perspective from someone who is clearly, a very passionate and knowledgeable fan. So if you're an intermediate level Camel fan, which is probably where I'd put myself, right? Meaning someone who, knows the music fairly well, but hasn't spent years immersed in message boards and newsletters and all that kind of stuff that he clearly has. I think it's it'll be an interesting companion to your next journey through their work. Certainly if you're someone who knows some of their material, but really wants to get to know it all in depth, it would be absolutely invaluable for that. There's a quote that Kuzminski finds from the author Alistair Thompson. I just wanted to read. I'm gonna kind of hit the highlights on this. This is not the full quote, but even though Kuzminski didn't write this himself, I think that his, I never would have read this quote if he hadn't put it in the book, and finding and recognizing how well written it is, I think, really a testament to his understanding of the music, and it just did, I think, a remarkably good job of summing up what I, and I think a lot of other people, find moving about Camel and Latimer's music. So the quote is, "What distinguishes Camel's music is really Latimer's musical personality, at least since he's taken to running the band on his own. There's an important idea that such intellectual luminaries as Camus and Orwell have tried to present in their works, which is decency. By this, I mean the basic need that people have at their best to be good to each other, whether in times of duress or in their small daily interactions, thus providing meaning in a world that often seems depressingly meaningless. It may be weird to associate this concept with rock music, but it's true in this case. While Latimer's music is tuneful and composed and definitely of interest to discerning listeners, there's just a sense of quiet decency and compassion in his songs, his playing, and his voice that makes this music for true grown-ups, not in the easy listening sense, but in that there is a lot of wisdom to be found here, a reassuring tranquility and an interest in human betterment." And yeah, that also really sums up very well my own sense of Camel's music. So if you seem like you might be interested in this book, I'd say you probably would be. Thanks much for your time, everybody, and I hope you have a good week.